What prisoners are served on Japan's death row? Truth revealed. Japan's death row prisoners face a life in confinement with an unsettling and secretive twist. Their meals. But what exactly are they served? The food served to prisoners on death row in Japan has remained a subject of mystery for many, and what goes on behind the prison walls might shock you. It's a life of confinement, uncertainty, and waiting, but what about their final days? Today, we're taking you inside the truth of what death row prisoners in Japan are served and how it shapes their final days. A life of silence and seclusion. Imagine being locked in a small, windowless cell, where time drags on like a never-ending blur. This is a reality for Japan's death row prisoners. They don't know when their time will come. Every day is the same, filled with silence and anxiety. They're cut off from the outside world, and their contact with other prisoners is strictly forbidden. In some cases, prisoners are even forbidden to speak to one another during their years of incarceration. Now, picture this. You're alone in this dark, isolated room. There's only one thing that keeps you going, your meals. But even this part of life is controlled. Prisoners on death row in Japan receive what can only be described as a bare minimum. They get 2 meals a day, breakfast and dinner. Meals are served in a way that strips away any hint of joy or luxury. Prisoners are not treated with compassion or dignity. They are simply fed what is necessary to survive. You might think that the food is bland or tasteless, but it goes beyond that. The portions are small, and there's little to no variety. For many, these meals are the only form of routine they have left. The food, what's on the menu? Death row prisoners in Japan are served traditional Japanese food, but not the kind you'd expect to find in a restaurant. Meals are often simple, unseasoned, and lacking in nutrition. For example, rice, fish, and a small bowl of soup are the common elements of their meals. A typical meal might include a small portion of rice, a piece of fish, and vegetables like pickled cabbage or daikon radish. The idea is to keep prisoners alive, but not to nourish or comfort them. Many inmates report that the food is bland and unappetizing. Imagine eating the same meal over and over, day after day, with little or no variation. For years, this is their reality. There's little care put into the food, and it's served in a way that reflects the prison system's approach. Minimal effort, minimal comfort. But there's more. The food is often served in plastic containers, and prisoners have to eat in their cells. The isolation is complete. No interaction with other prisoners. No socializing over a meal. They eat alone in silence, waiting for the end, the psychological impact. For those who have been on death row for years, the psychological toll is unimaginable. Not only are they locked away in tiny, dreary cells, but they live with the constant anxiety of not knowing when they will be executed. The waiting game can last for decades, and in some cases, prisoners are only informed of their execution hours before it happens. It's a cruel and inhumane reality that no one should have to endure. Food, however, plays an unexpected role in this waiting game. The monotony of the meals reflects the monotony of their lives. It's almost as if the lack of flavor, the lack of variety, symbolizes their lack of control. They have no say in when they'll leave, and they have no say in what they're served to eat. Their lives are stripped down to the basics. The food they are served can also play a role in their mental health. With such a limited diet, many prisoners suffer from malnutrition and health problems. The simple, bland food doesn't provide them with the nutrients they need, and over time, this leads to physical weakness. While the system ensures that prisoners stay alive, it does not provide them with the means to live a full, healthy life. As time passes, prisoners grow older and frilier. Their cells become even more suffocating, and their meals, the one consistent part of their day, seem even more lifeless. Yet for them, this food is just another part of the system they're trapped in, unchanging and unforgiving. The final meal, is there such a thing? While many people may be familiar with the concept of a final meal before execution, Japan's death row system does not follow this tradition. In many other countries, prisoners are allowed to request a last meal of their choice. This final request is seen as a way to give the condemned individual a bit of control over their last moments. However, in Japan, this is not the case. There are no special last meals. Instead, prisoners are given their regular meals right up until their execution. This adds to the dehumanizing nature of the Japanese death row system. For inmates, it's as if their entire existence is stripped of dignity, from their meals to their final moments. They are not granted a moment of comfort, not even through the food they eat. The lack of a last meal reflects the impersonal and calculated nature of their treatment. This policy of not allowing a final meal may seem harsh, but it's a part of the cold and methodical approach to handling death row inmates in Japan. For many, the lack of choice and freedom over their meals is a reminder of how powerless they truly are. Their lives are controlled from start to finish, down to the food they are served. This stark reality can create a feeling of hopelessness, as they know that not only is their life restricted, but their final moments will be too. The isolation beyond the meals. When we think of prisoners, we often imagine them living in a crowded environment, surrounded by others who may offer support or even companionship. But Japan's death row is a world apart. The isolation that prisoners face is unlike anything most of us can imagine. Inmates on death row are kept in solitary confinement, where they are not allowed to speak to or interact with other prisoners. This extreme isolation is meant to reflect the gravity of their crimes, but also exacerbates the mental and emotional toll of being on death row. They live alone in their cells, with little human contact except for guards and occasional prison staff. The absence of social interaction can have a devastating effect on mental health. The psychological strain of this isolation is compounded by the knowledge that their lives are in constant limbo. Every day could be their last, but they have no way of knowing when that day will come. This uncertainty is torturous. The monotony of their lives, paired with a lack of meaningful social contact and the bland meals they are given, creates an environment of despair. They are not only deprived of their freedom, but are also denied the basic human need for connection. The prisoners' lives are confined to the narrow, empty walls of their cells. The food they eat reflects this isolation. Simple, cold, and devoid of any comfort. It's a stark contrast to the experiences of many other prisoners in the world, where shared meals and community can offer a sense of normalcy, even in such dire circumstances. The death row execution, a silent end. The final part of a death row prisoner's journey is the execution itself, and in Japan, this process is as quiet and secretive as the rest of their time on death row. Unlike in some other countries, where executions are publicized or involve a certain level of ceremony, Japan's executions are carried out in complete secrecy. Prisoners are often not informed of their execution date until the very last moment, sometimes just hours before they are led to their death. There is no preparation, no chance for closure. They are simply told that their time has come, and then they are led away to be executed. This lack of warning is another part of the psychological torment that inmates face. They live with a constant anxiety that their execution can happen at any moment, but they are kept in the dark until the very end. The method of execution in Japan is hanging, and the process is carried out in a way that minimizes the emotional impact on the prison staff and other prisoners. Executions are typically done in the early hours of the morning, with only a few witnesses present, such as prison officials and legal representatives. The entire process is quiet, almost as if the person who has died is being erased from existence. The silence of the execution process mirrors the silence that defines the lives of death row prisoners. They spend their final moments knowing little about what is to come, and even less about the world they are about to leave behind. Their final meal, their final interactions, and their final breath are all marked by an overwhelming sense of isolation and fear. The controversy: Japan's death penalty system under scrutiny. Japan's death penalty system has long been a subject of controversy, not only because of the harsh treatment of its prisoners, but also because of the secrecy that surrounds executions. Human rights organizations, both within Japan and internationally, have repeatedly raised concerns about the fairness of the system. While Japan's government argues that the death penalty is an important deterrent to crime, critics claim that it's a relic of an outdated justice system that often fails to protect the rights of its citizens. One of the most troubling aspects of the death penalty in Japan is the length of time prisoners spend on death row. Many inmates remain in solitary confinement for decades before their execution takes place. During this time, they experience the same isolation and lack of communication that we discussed earlier, which only heightens the psychological toll. Some prisoners have been known to develop severe mental health issues due to the uncertainty and isolation they endure. Additionally, Japan's lack of transparency surrounding the execution process has led to accusations of cruelty. Unlike many Western nations, where executions are at least somewhat open to the public or subject to judicial oversight, Japan's execution process is carried out with extreme secrecy. Prisoners' families are not informed of the execution date until after the event has occurred, leaving them with no opportunity for closure or last visits. In recent years, there has been increasing international pressure on Japan to abolish the death penalty, or, at the very least, reform its system to make it more humane. While the Japanese government has maintained its stance on capital punishment, the calls for change continue to grow louder. The treatment of prisoners on death row, including the conditions they live under and the food they are served, is at the heart of this debate. The impact on families, the hidden cost of the death penalty, the effects of Japan's death penalty system are not limited to the prisoners themselves. The families of death row inmates also bear a heavy burden, one that is often ignored in discussions about capital punishment. Imagine being the loved one of a person who has been sentenced to death. For years, you know that your family member is living in a state of uncertainty and isolation. The emotional toll this takes on families is often devastating. For many families, the waiting game is just as agonizing as it is for prisoners. They live in a state of fear, knowing that any day could be the day their loved one is executed. But what makes the situation even worse is the complete lack of communication. Families are not informed about their relative's condition, and they often don't know when an execution is scheduled to take place until it's too late. This adds a layer of distress and uncertainty that many families struggle to cope with. The Japanese government's secrecy extends to how it handles the notification of an execution. Family members are informed only after the execution has taken place. This means that, for many, there's no chance to say goodbye, no opportunity to hold their loved one's hand one last time. For family members, the entire process is an ongoing nightmare. This lack of transparency and communication further reinforces the inhumanity of the death penalty in Japan. It's not just the prisoners who suffer in silence. Their families are also subjected to a never-ending emotional turmoil. The toll on loved ones is often ignored in discussions about capital punishment, but it is an undeniable and heartbreaking consequence of the system. A global perspective, the growing calls for reform. As the world becomes increasingly interconnected, international pressure on countries with controversial practices, such as Japan's use of the death penalty, continues to mount. Many nations around the globe, including those in Europe and the Americas, have abolished the death penalty entirely. The growing belief in human rights and the importance of dignity for all people has led to a worldwide movement against capital punishment. Japan stands as one of the few developed nations that still practices the death penalty, and this is placed at odds with much of the global community. In recent years, the United Nations and various human rights organizations have called for Japan to end its use of the death penalty, pointing to the psychological harm it inflicts on prisoners and their families, the lack of due process in many cases, and the secretive nature of the executions. The conditions on death row, including the food served to prisoners, have become a symbol of the broader issue of human rights in Japan's prison system. As Japan continues to resist calls for reform, the question remains, is it time for Japan to reconsider its approach to justice, to find a more humane and transparent way to deal with prisoners who have been convicted of the most serious crimes? While Japan remains steadfast in its commitment to capital punishment, there are signs that the global debate is beginning to influence its approach. More people inside Japan and around the world are questioning whether the death penalty is truly an effective or just form of punishment. The growing movement toward reform continues to gain traction, but only time will tell if Japan will listen to the call for change. As we've seen, the lives of prisoners on Japan's death row are marked by isolation, uncertainty, and a lack of dignity, even in something as basic as their meals. The secrecy, the psychological toll, and the dehumanizing conditions all paint a stark picture of what it's like to live on the edge of life and death. The debate over Japan's death penalty system continues to evolve, and while some argue the necessary measure, others are calling for reform. One thing is clear. No matter where you stand on the issue, the treatment of prisoners, their final moments, and their families is something we should all reflect on. Thank you for watching. If you found this video eye-opening, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Exposing Prison Realities for more insightful documentaries on the dark realities of crime and punishment. And remember, the truth can't be locked away. See you in the next video.